Hello and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction from Sky News with me, Beth Rigby.
Me, Ruth Davidson.
And me, Harriet Harman.
Now, the band is back together a bit earlier than planned this week because it's been a momentous few days. The US has attacked Iran and the world is now holding its breath over what the Iranians might do next. Over the weekend, Trump said his military had completely and fully obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities. That is being questioned already, actually. And Iran, in response, said there will be everlasting consequences for the first ever US airstrikes on Iran. It has been quite a few days.
Well, look, there's obviously a lot going on. So we wanted to give you a bit of an update on where things stand, how this could play out for us here in the UK. And we're also going to try and understand where Keir Starmer's head is at. And if you've been listening to government ministers on the media rounds, you'd be forgiven for being a little bit confused, actually, about what the UK position actually is.
And all the time, really, events are moving very fast. So it's worth saying that we're recording this on Monday morning, a Monday that's come after, as Beth has said, a weekend that really feels like it's going to go down in history.
Yeah, it really does.
Well, look, let's start with what's happened. So, the end of last week was full of the will he, won't he kind of chat as everyone was trying to second guess whether Trump was going to intervene in the Middle East and whether he was going to bomb Iran. Now, this is all about, if you remember, Iran's nuclear capabilities and the fact that the US is the only country in the world with powerful enough weapons to take out the nuclear sites in Iran, which basically where they are making all the material, refining it, making it weapons grade radioactive of nuclear sort of material. They've put these labs and development facilities underneath the ground, underneath mountains. So you got to get through loads and loads of rock and concrete to even get to them. America has the only bunker busting bombs in the world that even have a fighting chance of getting to those sorts of depths.
Actually, on those bunker bombs, they used 14 of these 30,000-pound bombs. There are 125 jets. They fired Tomahawk missiles from submarines. I mean, it was really a serious operation. Israel had been firing missiles at Iran for the past week, saying it was acting in self-defense. Iran then retaliated with missile attacks. And as you say, Ruth, the question was whether Trump would get involved. Fast forward Saturday night, they were moving assets all around, deploying those stealth bombers. So really, the writing was on the wall. I mean, also, these attacks did happen overnight, and they did happen at 1 a.m. UK time. Trump announcing he'd hit 3 nuclear sites in Iran, despite the calls for de-escalation from people like our own PM, Keir Starmer. But we'll come back on to that.
So we don't know the full extent of the damage that the US bombers have done to those Iranian nuclear sites yet. But we do know that the US says no Iranian civilians were targeted and that the US bombers got in and out of Iranian airspace without being attacked.
Yeah, which brings us back partly to the military, but also partly to what is exactly going on. But I guess where I would start, Beth, is you were with the Prime Minister over the weekend. So, in terms of the government's response, they are completely dead batting this. It is all, we're not saying we're supporting it, we're not saying we're opposing it, we just want de escalation. But have you got any kind of insight into where Starmer's head is in all of this and what his own reaction is rather than just that really official holding line that the government's been giving everybody?
Yeah, I mean, I did see the Prime Minister yesterday, and it was absolutely fascinating, partly because of what he didn't say rather than what he did say. Now, interestingly, he was actually at Chequers, his country residence. I thought he'd come back to Downing Street, right? Because you'd want to be kind of in Downing Street looking like you're working. But actually, when I got there, he'd been on the phone all morning. So he literally did not have an hour to get from Chequers to Cobra in Downing Street. Presumably, I don't know, Harriet, but I'd assume that you can't have a secure line in a
No,
car.
not in the car, no.
Yeah. So actually, he was at Chequers. So we actually went and did this clip. And I've never been in Chequers, and that's a whole different story. But we went into the Churchill room. It's all wood panelled. It's like 16th century or something. And, he's in front of the flags. And I thought it was a prime minister that was in a bit of a difficult situation in terms of what he could say. it was really clear to me because the first question I said was, "Do you support these attacks?"
Well, we've long had concerns about the Iranian nuclear programme and been very clear that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. The US has now taken action to alleviate that threat. It is important that we now de-escalate the situation, stabilise the region, and get the parties back around the table to negotiate.
Prime Minister, if Iran attacks the US, that would be an attack on a NATO ally. If they attack bases, etc., in the region, it could trigger Article 5. Are you prepared for that, and would the UK become involved?
Well, I'm not going to speculate about what may happen because all of my focus is on de-escalation.
I could have asked him repeatedly about whether he supported an attack, and it would have probably got more and more and more uncomfortable as we went along. Look, Ruth, I think really what's going on is I don't think he supported the attacks. He certainly didn't want the attacks. If he criticises Trump publicly, it gives him even a less opportunity to get his ear. But he can't say he supports something he doesn't support. So they're treading this fine line. But I also felt all of it was just how powerless everyone is actually when it comes to dealing with Donald Trump. And it felt to me, to be honest, like a prime minister that's doing his level best to influence events, but he and other leaders are surplus to Trump's requirements.
For now, because the next thing that strikes me is, it is unlikely, given the tensions and unrest we've seen in Iran, given the protests that we've seen on the streets in 2022, 2023, given the way the sanctions have bitten into the living conditions of the populace, which was already chafing against the kind of Islamic regime anyway, that Khomeini is going to have to respond. And it's what is that response going to be? And there's a lot of speculation from better military analysts than any of us about whether that's going to be an American base that's based in the Middle East, whether it's going to be, what they've got in Bahrain, whether it's going to be their naval base out at sea, whether they're going to sow sea mines and strategic straits, like what it is going to be. And it's fine to a degree that Starmer's counting himself out of this right now. But if US troops and personnel on a US military base get hit in response, we are an ally of the US. He can invoke NATO Article 5 at any time. US bases abroad count as US territory. He can't sit he's got he can't sit on the fence forever. And sending his ministers out today on the breakfast rounds trying to say as hard as they could that they didn't disagree, but they didn't agree, and just completely flatlining that question. It will not hold. At some point, the government has to make a decision of whose side it's on because it just can't hold.
I mean, where do you think his head would be at, Harriet? You must have some experience of this going out on a media round and not being able to really say what's really going on.
Well, I don't think that he will be feeling foolish, and I don't think either that he'll be feeling surplus to requirements. I mean, there's a number of things here. I mean, sometimes in government, you can have views and you can have knowledge, but you just can't say them because what you've got to do is be in a position to act, and you mustn't do or say anything which undermines your position to actually go forward in the way that you want things to. You do, as government, have to forbear from saying something, not because you don't know the answer or because you don't have a view,
Mm.
but because the answer wouldn't actually help. Although it does leave the country puzzling as to what your actual view is. We had a similar situation on the Trump tariffs because the government were constantly asked, are you in favour of these tariffs or not? Do you criticise what Trump is doing? Do you condemn these tariffs? And it was absolutely evident, bearing in mind that our number one priority, well, after defence and security, is economic growth, that the government was very concerned indeed that these tariffs would inhibit growth. But their main concern was not to comment on that, but to get a trade deal. And therefore, criticising Trump and saying we don't agree with these tariffs might well have made it more difficult to get to where we wanted to do, which is to get a trade deal. And the UK is in quite, rather than being surplus to requirements, I think the UK is in quite an important position because we do have an ambassador in Tehran. We do have an Iranian ambassador in the UK, and we also have a very close and special relationship with the US. So, in terms of the mechanisms of de escalation, our role is important. But I think looking back to, for example, the situation of how different it is from Iraq, because there, the question of the UN and what was being said at the UN
Mm,
Security Council before the attack on Saddam Hussein was really important. The question of international law was to the fore, both in the UK and in the US. And there was a real determination for the UK and the US to get as many allies on board as possible. And what you see here now with this Trump incursion into Iran is that he has not taken any cognizance of the UN. He's not sought to get a resolution supporting what he's doing at all. He's just bypassed them. In terms of international law, he's taking no cognizance of it at all. And he's not interested in getting everybody to support him. He's just interested in
mm,
doing it because he can.
This comes back to Iraq, isn't it? Because actually, it's been quite long established in international law that you are allowed to launch a preemptive strike on somebody that you believe is an imminent danger to your country. You don't have to wait to be attacked because that would be silly because you would allow your populace, members of your populace to die, etc., before you launch a counter strike. And that is the principle within international law under which the current White House says that it's operating. Now, I completely take your point that we've seen in previous conflicts that you then retrospectively have to go back and get UN approval. You have to do all of this other stuff. But in terms of whether it's a mad out there thing that's never happened before, actually that part's not true. We have seen that there is precedent for it. But it's just I think, to be honest, Beth, I think it's just the speed at which this has happened at.
mm. Yeah,
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 I don't think it's that it hasn't happened before. It's just that prior to the attack in Iraq, the government in UK and the US paid a lot of attention to international law, paid a lot of attention to the UN, and wanted to get lots of allies before they did it. And indeed,
yes.
we actually sought parliamentary approval in the UK. And all of those things are different now. But I think that probably Keir Starmer would have been quite relieved that America didn't feel the need, either politically or operationally, to ask for the UK's support before it launched these strikes, because I think that Keir Starmer might have felt in turn the need to get Parliament's support for it, although that's not in law a requirement. It is now a convention that when you're using force abroad, that you do actually get the support of Parliament. And I think that the Parliamentary Labour Party, which feels so badly about what Israel is doing in Gaza, and about the support that Trump is giving for Israel and what Israel's doing in Gaza, would have been really loath to support a US incursion at this point, especially when they're being asked to vote on the welfare cuts.
On what you said earlier, Harriet, about kind of me suggesting that they were surplus to requirements and sort of saying actually that might not be the case. I think you are. I think you do have a real point there in that they were surplus to requirements when Trump was deciding whether or not to take military action. He didn't really need to negotiate or consult with allies because he decided to do it unilaterally. He didn't use the Diego Garcia base. They decided to fly the jets over and they refueled midair. And I checked that out with government about whether or not there had been back channeling to say, please don't ask us because legally we're in a sensitive situation and we might not want to do that. A view of one government insider was that it wasn't because of the delicacy of the situation about the UK's potential predicament about being comfortable for the US to use that base. It was rather just that Trump decided to do it, how Trump decided to do it. To be fair to Starmer, he was on the phone to the leaders of Jordan, of Oman, of Canada. They put out an E3 statement from Germany, UK, France yesterday evening. So they are behind the scenes trying, and it might be now that Trump has done the military action and now really the ball is in Iran's court that he might be more open, if you like, to allies trying to play a role. But the other thing, Ruth, what you said, which pricked my ears, is about escalation. Look, the thing is, this is what another government figure said to me yesterday, like, kind of, where are we? And people don't know. We're waiting to see what does Iran do. But this person said two things to me. They said, one, if Iran just continues to fire missiles at Israel, the regime looks weak because they've had an escalation and they haven't responded. So they have to do something more, or they'll want to do something more. If they attack US bases, well, I mean, it could be all out war. Can you imagine if there are US casualties because of this? What if they don't decide to attack US bases and they go for US proxies? Now, that might be more unlikely because it was unilateral action, but what if they do attack some of the US's allies? And that's, we're moving all our military assets over there. So it's really precarious. And it's almost like the Iranian response might precipitate a more joined up allied response. I have to say, I just don't know how it's going to go. And I would not want to have to be a prime minister trying to navigate this right now. It must be a bloody nightmare, quite frankly.
I would say probably in this and in the world right now, there's probably three, which is America, Russia, and China as the kind of great actors right now. I think what's been really interesting is Russia's in a difficult position too because of what it's doing in Ukraine, and the fact that Donald Trump has been much more equivocal about that than his predecessor Joe Biden in terms of actually not being as supportive of Ukraine against Russia as they otherwise might have been, and they're getting some mileage out of Trump. That the Russian response hasn't been as bellicose, it hasn't been as insulting as it might otherwise have been under a different U.S. president. China has completely exited stage right. They have no wish to, they're not making statements. They're completely sinking into the background here. And in terms of Russia having to also be in some ways sympathetic to Iran because Iran's an ally of it, Iran's also given them a huge swedge of military assets and kit to fight in Ukraine. So it's given them, the large majority of its drone capability has come from Iran. They have to walk that line as well, but they don't have spare capacity to help Iran. So in terms of how the great states line up, actually at this point, Iran is quite exposed.
It probably doesn't help when Trump overnight, having had sent out Rubio and various other people like Hegseth, his defense secretary, to say we are not advocating regime change in Iran, to then do on Truth Social something about implying maybe it's a good idea if there's a regime change in Iran. I mean, that does not give the Iranians a ladder to climb down. I mean, it doesn't help, does it?
Well, I think that it is confusing when there's different things coming out of the US administration. You've got Rubio saying it's all about negotiation now. You've got Vance saying, oh, it's one and done. You've got Hesketh saying, actually, it's about deterrence. And then suddenly you come out with Trump saying regime change, but he's done it in quite weaselly words. He could be meaning the people in Iran doing the regime change, not the US. So he's kind of, he's playing games with words there. But I think there's also the economic impact of whatever response Iran
Yes.
makes. For example, there's been talk in the Iranian parliament of them blocking off the Straits of Hormuz, where
Yeah.
something between 20 and 30% of the world's oil and gas goes through that, and therefore it would massively reduce the supply and increase the price. And the irony is, today is the day when the government's industrial strategy has been published, and that really emphasizes the importance of protecting industry by not having soaring energy costs.
Look, it's a nightmare for a prime minister because now he's got kind of he's juggling the hot potatoes of, I mean, potentially have like taking decisions on military action, and there's also the economic fallout of this. Trump did it over the weekend when the markets are closed, but the knock-on effect for, as you said, Harriet, oil and gas prices and wider global economy. I mean, it's just a nightmare. Harriet, just you've been inside, you've been in the in the room where it happens. What do you think it's like in government? What do you think the mood's like in there at the moment?
Well, I think that it might in some ways seem a bit opaque to us what it is they're thinking because of the restrictions on what they're saying. But I get a sense that there is a pretty clear and united view, which is that a recognition of the seriousness of the situation, a keenness for the UK to play whatever part it can, and an absolute belief of two things. Iran shouldn't be allowed to develop nuclear weapons because that would be a massive danger, and that the way to stop that is to do it through diplomacy. I was very struck by what David Lammy said when he said that for our domestic nuclear purposes, we enrich only up to a maximum of 9%, and yet Iran seem to want to be going up to 60%. And immediately you think, well, why on earth would they need to do that?
Mm.
So I think they'll just be on permanent alert. And certainly I don't think Keir Starmer will be doing any car journeys where he can't be speaking to people the whole time. I sometimes think about, do you remember when he said he was going to take Fridays off and have a
Oh
nice dinner with
yeah.
his family? I thought at the time, probably not. I can't imagine he'll be having a nice dinner with his family any
No,
Friday soon.
I think he didn't. I mean, I got down to Chequers, and I have to say, I haven't ever actually been inside Chequers until I've been outside because they've done things with Trump in the garden. But you can see why a prime minister actually, for all of the, grace and favor homes, like just to have that space and a bit of time to think and a bit of time to be with your family and just decompress from the intensity of the job. I can see why it becomes very valuable to them.
Chequers is not a stately mansion, which is part of the Starmer property portfolio.
No,
This is
it's
a
not. So
massive,
it's massive.
beautiful,
Yeah.
absolutely wonderful, historic home in the home counties.
Yeah.
It's absolutely beautiful. You will not find it on a map because
No.
Google won't report it. But if you go there, you know when you're getting near because you spy out of the corner of your eyes on the tops of hills. You suddenly think, oh, that looks like a couple of men holding rifles up there. So it's very, very secure. And it's the place where prime ministers can bring presidents and
Mm.
foreign ministers to discuss,
Yeah.
and where they can take the cabinet for, away days. And so it's like it's the annex of Downing Street.
Well, obviously, it's going to be top of the agenda at NATO next week. They were due to meet anyway, the member countries of NATO. Obviously, this is given it a heightened sense of importance about what they decide
Yeah.
because they can make decisions, but the decisions might not actually have any
Yeah.
form, like any actual effect.
It starts tomorrow. I think Trump is due to attend still, but I think it will be a very short. I think he shortened the visit. They've also tried to keep NATO quite short because of his attention span, and he tends to sort of, decide to leave early or whatever. But I think there's a couple of things about NATO. One thing that we confirmed last night on Sunday night, that the ambassadors to NATO, also the countries effectively have agreed in principle the UK plan to have to put in the statements that countries will aim to hit 5% of GDP spending on defence by 2035 with this review clause. Do you remember we talked about it in the pod on Friday? In 2029. Now, for Trump, this will be a massive moment of success because he has been insisting that NATO countries sign up to this. So this for him in normal times, if you like, if we're never in normal times anymore, are we? But that will be seen, I think, as a triumph for Trump, which will kind of, you would think, entice him to come to NATO to mark that. I think there's a few things to watch out for. One is, you know, will Trump want a joint statement from NATO allies supporting the strikes? That's really difficult for the Prime Minister. Indeed, the Germany, UK, French. The German UK French statement from last night was much like the Prime Minister's, which was acknowledging that the strikes had happened and then calling for de escalation. And there's a sort of sense of neutrality from some of the NATO members. So I'm interested to see where that goes or doesn't. Um, and then, of course, there's a whole other massive conflict in Europe, which is Ukraine. Zelensky is in the UK on Monday to talk about defense. Trump left G7 early, didn't see Zelensky. Zelensky's trying to negotiate a package with him. Um, to buy more weapons. So I'll be interested to see whether anything comes of that. But really, all eyes are going to be obviously on Israel, Iran, and what NATO says about that. Harriet, do you have any expectations for NATO? I mean, if you were in government now, it's sort of everything feels secondary, doesn't it, to the actual immediate crisis that governments and prime ministers and leaders are facing about the Iran-Israel escalation and what flows from that if Iran do take retaliatory action that draw others into a conflict.
Well, I think that what the government's got to do, and presumably is trying to do, is to keep all those other multilateral organisations which Trump seems to be quite happy to bypass, but which are incredibly important in the global political and diplomatic ecosystem, to keep them working as well as possible. But I
Mm,
still feel that in a world where Trump is bypassing a lot, the UK still actually has
mm.
quite a pivotal position.
Well, look, the politics doesn't stop, and it doesn't matter whether it's geopolitics or domestic politics. There's plenty going on right now. That is all that we've got time for today. Thank you for joining us for this extra episode. We'll be back at our usual time on Friday, where we'll be able to discuss NATO, we'll be able to discuss what's going on in Iran, we'll be able to discuss welfare cuts. Loads happening right now. Do remember to follow us to get that episode as soon as it is out.
And if you have any questions, do message us, get us on the burner phone. The number is 07934 200 444, or you can email us at electoraldysfunction@sky.uk. And if you like the pod, do leave us a review as well. And please share us with your friends. There's a lot of news at the moment, and we are your news bunnies popping up, giving you a bit of news and hopefully a bit of insight. So thanks for joining us. It was lovely to hang out. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.